So just from a show of hands, who here knows exactly where they want to be in like 5 years, 2 years, 1 year? That seems about right. Who knows what they want to do tomorrow? Yeah, just Cheryl, get out. You're kicked out of the Zoom. Maybe two. Yeah, no, especially working in career services where you're around people with clear paths all the time, it can be a lot of pressure if you don't know really what you want to do. So I sort of put together this because there are a lot of ways to really, really be successful without knowing where you want to be in 5 years, 4 years, even 1 year, even 6 months, So let me go ahead and start the presentation. All right. Do these questions look sort of familiar to people? Have you guys been, if we've got people who are close to graduation too, are these like questions that really trigger some deep, terrible emotions in you? Seeing some nods. Yeah, hated them, got asked them all the time. I actually asked you a version of that to start this presentation. What do you major in? And just by like a show of hands or nodding, who panics when people ask them this sometimes? Yeah, I definitely do. Oh my gosh. I remember graduating, hearing it all the time, hated it. If I had $1 for every time somebody asked me these questions, I wouldn't have needed to have a job, So if you panic or you don't like these questions, you're on the right path. If you actually don't panic a little bit when you hear these questions or something doesn't feel wrong, it should give you pause, because there's something about these questions and what they're really asking you that we have been groomed from kids. Because these questions, especially what are you going to do when you grow up, they start asking you that question as young as kindergarten, right? Think about to the first time somebody ever asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? For me, it was definitely kindergarten. We had a whole class project on it. And nobody's ever expecting the answer, oh, I want to be happy, or I want to be funny, or my answer, I'd like to be a ballerina turtle. So, nobody's ever asking those questions. Even from kindergarten, you're expected to answer fireman, teacher. So early as kindergarten, we're starting to groom that you're choosing not an identity, not a future, but a job. And that's the issue with all of these questions, right? When people ask you, what are you going to do after you graduate? Nobody's asking if you're going to start a new D&D campaign or open an Etsy shop. They want to know, what are you going to do when you work? Which leads us to only have one conclusion. Does identity equal career? That is what we have been groomed to think as soon as they asked us that. And I'm here to say there's a really big problem with that, because every employer would love if as soon as someone says, oh, my career, I'm going to be accountant. I was born to be an accountant. That's like everybody's dream. But there's a lot more to being a person than what you do. So the first step about all these things is sort of to think to yourself, these don't agree. My identity is more than my career, because that puts a lot of pressure on somebody, especially if you don't know what you want to be. So for everybody who doesn't know what they want to be in a year or 5 years or where they're going to be, you still have identity. I know it can feel really hard. It can feel, like you're missing a big part. For me, I know even now when people have said, oh, what do you do? They're asking, what is your job? And those two things should not be the same. It is a huge issue, and you hear it over in tons and tons and tons of different questions. You even see it in movies. Everybody know the movie Nanny McPhee. Who knows, does that movie from childhood bring up? Or Mary Poppins, right? Their identity is nannies, right? You'd never say, it's in her name, Nanny McPhee, right? She gets nothing, she's got all these characteristics, but what we take away is her job. So in movies, if you ever hear a movie where they're talking about my destiny or my purpose, right? It almost always links back to their career. So you'll see this idea repeated over in questions that you get asked, in movies that you see. And the first step is to really separate our identity and our self-worth from our careers. They are not the same. So next time you think to yourself, oh, I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years, and it causes an existential crisis, put a pause on it, and we're going to separate those two. So just another, show me nods, hands. Have people been having sort of those thoughts like, I don't know what I'm going to do, rolling into existential crises, crying over a glass of wine because graduation's coming, you have no idea what to do? That's where I was, 2 years ago, last Tuesday, any day, right? And just by a show of hands, who would call that an existential crisis? Anybody use those words before? Saying, Mom, Dad, I can't have dinner with you over Zoom tonight. I'm having an existential crisis. That sound about right to people? Yes. I'm here to tell you we need to rename it. It is not an existential crisis. No more. No more blaming existentialism for your crisis. You are having one, but it's an essentialist crisis. And I'm sure, are these new terms to people? Yeses, no's. So essentialist versus existentialist, major philosophy terms, but they come to the basis of a lot of important questions, like, can people change? Essentialist versus existentialist have totally different opinions on that. Are you really you if you're drunk? They both have totally different answers to that. And they both have two polar opposite views of how identity is construction. So let's break it down. And I want to introduce you to my friend, Tony. Tony is an essentialist. Tony thinks that when he was born, he had kindness, anger, and all these building blocks that made him a person. So this is how essentialists view identity. You are born with a set amount of personality traits, and you go through your life making decisions based off these traits. Tony seemed, there are some he doesn't know that he still has to discover, but essentially he is already built, and any decision he makes off of this, he makes because of his personalities. If you guys have ever seen this meme, this is essentialism, that you are built in a way and all of your decisions are based off of this. But the issue with that is it doesn't leave a lot of room for change. And when it turns to careers, it sort of gives this idea that if you don't know what you want to do, but you keep digging and digging and looking inside yourself and meditating and all this stuff, that eventually you'll find the answer. This is the sort of philosophy that you find in Moana. Who's seen the new, and I guess it's not new anymore, see Moana? People know that whole thing. Who am I? She thinks the more she looks in, the more she'll figure out what her ultimate purpose and destiny is. That's essentialism. But that's not always the case, It doesn't leave a lot of room for change. And it can be really frustrating to think that you're looking deep, deep down inside yourself and still not coming up with any answers. And it has a hard time answering a question I brought up earlier. What about, are you the same person if you're drunk or sober? So let's look at, wrong way. So, when we go back to our friend over here, right? He's got kindness right there. Well, if Tony's a really kind person all the time and then goes out and has a few too many and starts being a real butt and super mean to everybody, essentialism would say, well, Tony was not actually Tony when he was drunk. He was an entirely different person because he acted against his building blocks of identity. But that can be really difficult because that allows people not to take responsibility for their actions if they act against it. And for the most part, doesn't really make sense. Then, if you're not you when you're hungry or you're tired or you're drunk because you're acting apart from these building blocks. So, essentialist identity theory either says there's one main one and like 1,000 little divergent personalities when we act against the core. That can get really, really messy. That's one of the biggest flaws with essentialist identity theory. The other thing is how it relates to our career search, because we know media, companies, everybody wants us to think our identity is central to the career that we choose. Well, essentialism would say we are born with a career then. That's his question mark. He's just waiting to discover the career. And the worst thing that it does is this idea of paths. Has anyone ever thought to themselves, well, I don't want to explore this because what if I put all this time and money and energy down the wrong path? Does that feel familiar to people? You know, when you were choosing a major, you know, well, I don't want to choose the wrong major. I might choose the wrong path. That's one of the most dangerous things that essentialism can do to you, because there really is no wrong path. And having so much pressure on you to know exactly what you wanted when you chose your major, or know exactly what you want when you leave college, or know exactly what you want for your kindergarten project is unrealistic and puts way too much pressure on you. So essentialism has a lot of flaws. So next time you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, I need to find the purpose to my existence, you have to name it what it is: an essentialist identity crisis. My advice: lean in to existentialism. Wild, I know. This thing that you thought was your crisis the whole time is actually the solution to this very question. So I have another friend, Rachel, and existentialism is her sort of mode of identity. And what it really shows, that the heart of existentialism is choice, always. They're saying that no matter what you do, no matter what situation you are, you have choice. To be human is not to say I am. To be human is to say I become. And that's a really important distinction. I become. So when Rachel is choosing her career journey, she doesn't start out by saying, well, I don't know what I was born to be or what my career destiny is, but I'm going to start in an office. And then she makes the choice to do baking or firefighting. She's got a really wild life in this graphic that I created. And but ultimately, if she makes the choice to be happy, then she chose an existentialist outlook to it. And really, to become leaves the amount of flexibility in their lives. On average, people will change their careers 11 or 12 times in their lifetime. That's enough to be a huge midlife crisis at least 12 times if you follow essentialist identity theory. But in the existentialist way of looking at it, it's meant to be. You will always choose. And even though her path has zigzags, there is no wrong path. Her identity is merely the culmination of all of the choices that she's made in life. She wasn't born to be anything. She chose to become something. And that will take so much pressure off of any career decision that you can make, any major decision that you can make, knowing that there's always room for change. There's always room for choice. It is not I am, but I become. So when you're looking to do your own sort of I become, you have to think not in what am I meant to do, what am I built of, but what would I like to do, right? What will make me happy? Which sort of leads to the next concept of existentialism. This idea of Hevel. Is Hevel a new word for most people here? Yeah, I don't think it's been really popular since the book of Ecclesiastes, so that makes sense. But Hevel is kind of what scares people about existentialism. It's this idea that time and death make a fool out of everything, which is scary. I mean, it's really scary to think of death and time and sort of the chaos of very existence. But it can also be really freeing, because when we're looking to make choices for our future and our own identity, we're not searching for a job, a purpose, a destiny. What we're searching for is meaning, right? What we're searching for is things that aren't Hevel. So to give an example of Hevel, anybody cried really hard or pulled their hair out over like a middle school paper that ended up not meaning anything, that the teacher didn't even grade or look at? That's Hevel. If anybody's ever like teared their hair out about an ex, they're Hevel, right? Those things that you've cried about or made yourself angry over that ultimately amounted to very little, that's all Hevel, because time and death will mean that they had nothing at all. And that can be really freeing, because there was quite a little bit of Hevel that I had to get rid of from, the things that I've experienced, but it can also be really scary. right? Because in that sort of idea, what isn't Hevel? Is everything Hevel? Does death and time kill everything? And I think this is the question that we need when you look to the future that you want to ask yourself. Not everything is Hevel. I mean, I can think of things that are permeated time already, music and art in my instance, or family, right? How we feel about our ancestors or our grandparents, right? Sort of the effect that maybe like, David Bowie, right? Death has not made Hevel out of David Bowie or anything like that. So there can be meaning that exists past these concepts of time and death. And the idea is when we're sort of prioritizing what's going to be important in our career search, we want to look for meaning. So in my life, the things that provide meaning, my personal relationships, or the things that make me have fun, and it sounds very philosophical and very divorced from the reality of career searching. But I think it's important, if we're going to beat Hevel, we have to make sure we have perspective. We have to keep in mind what's important. However, I am not totally so philosophical that I forget what it's like to be a real human being. I have student loan debt and all this stuff. So I think what it comes to is we have to find a compromise between a life searching for the things that are meaningful and make us happy, the things that we can make lasting, families, things like that, and a job, something to support us. We have to find somewhere in between. So I think what we need to do is start asking ourselves different sort of questions like, what adds meaning to my life? What can I do to support the things that are meaningful? Am I giving too much to my job? I remember when I was in college and I did a million things, 3 jobs, 18 credits, it didn't leave a lot of time for the things that I enjoyed. So we have to make sure that balance is important. Otherwise, we're handing ourselves over to a system that sees us as labor. And we want to make sure we try to avoid that as much as possible, because it's really important that, and this is if you take away anything from this presentation, you need to ask yourself, if I didn't have this job, who would I be? Ask the question. I want you to, like every terrible Hallmark movie with the main character who is the female who is essentially the personification of her job. If she didn't have that job, who would that character be, right? She's gone about it the wrong way. But jobs will come and go. The things, they're Hevel. Time and death will kill them. What are the things that are meaningful to you that you can do? So I'm just going to bring it all together and sort of open it up for questions or discussions if people have new ideas about it. But the first thing, identity and your career are totally separate. Totally separate. That's the first step in understanding any of this. Second is that you are not predetermined. There is no part about your identity that is set in stone. You are someone who will change, and that is good. It's great. It's exactly what should happen. If you take an existentialist view of careers, there is no wrong path. You can make no wrong decision. What your future like will be totally impossible if you don't explore all the different paths. And when we go forward, try to focus on meeting and throw out those Hevel things, the things that aren't going to matter in 5-10 years. And just to keep in perspective, you're looking for a job, not an identity, not a life. The reason people even find jobs now is conflated. They look for 2 things, money, support, things to make sure that you're not starving, and fulfillment. And that's sort of where it all went wrong. We thought that one job had to fulfill both of those things. If they do, that's great. But if you're like me and you've looked at a ton of career paths and you don't think there is one that's going to fulfill both of those things, it's okay. It's a good idea to find things that are meaningful to you outside of your job, right? That means that you would still be a person even without it. That's existentialism, baby. That's it. That's what really matters.